Shalom, and welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast and TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Adres. We welcome you and thank you for your time. As you know, these podcasts are designed to talk about issues, resources that impact our generation as a result of the revolution in longevity and how that revolution is impacting us, our families, communities, congregations, etc. If you would like to ask a question, make a comment, or a suggestion about future shows, please feel free to email me at rabbiadress@jewishsacredaging.com. Visit the Facebook page and the website again, jewishsacredaging.com. One of the ongoing conversations that we have in many of the workshops that we do with Jewish Sacred Aging is the navigation of this rather, shall we say, interesting stage of life as we live longer and hopefully we live better. And we are delighted to welcome to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, Shulamit Greer, and to discuss her book, From Oi to Joy, that's correct, Making the Best of Your Life for the Rest of Your Life, From Oi to Joy, which sounds better in New Jersey than it may in other parts of the country, but that's okay. Shulamit, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. How you doing?
Thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk with you and share our message to help people have a more prosperous, plentiful, pleasant older age. It's possible.
Yeah, that's what they tell me. And so the book is, first of all, let's get this out so people understand. The book is available where? The usual custom places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble?
The book will be available on Amazon as people will find by going to Amazon or by going to my website, spiritualaging.com.
Spiritualaging.com. You start this... What? Go ahead.
There's a link on the website that they could get the book from.
You start this book with one of my colleagues and many of my colleagues, one of our favorite meditations, prayers, poems, however you want to call it, from the late Alvin Fine, which begins, birth is a beginning and death is a destination. Why that? Why that poem?
Well, that poem preceded my book by decades, my awareness of it. I'm a member of Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco, where he had been the Rabbi Emeritus, and it was easily accessible, and it just struck a chord in my soul about that's exactly what life is all about. I mean, he nailed it. And I just always had it in mind, and I didn't really think about even writing the book or including the poem until the pandemic. When, like everyone else, I was stopped in my tracks. And I think it really accelerated my own experience of getting older and even experience physical, markers of aging that hadn't been there previously.
It's amazing you said, because one of our previous guests a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about, again, the why that they wrote his book. And again, one of the motivating factors was the pandemic and the reality that the pandemic brought to many of our generation of our own mortality. And because you were basically locked down for 2.5 years, you could only do so much. You present this manifesto, a guideline, guide, recipe, whatever you want to call it, for this, there's like the subtitle, Making the Best of Your Life for the Rest of Your Life. But let's start with the fun title, the Oi. Why that? What when you wrote that and came up with that title, Oi, what popped into your mind and your soul? Why that word?
Well, it's such a delicious word, and we as Jews use it a lot, and it has a lot of connotation, and it's kind of a place of broaden, a place that culturally, we rest into for very complicated reasons, some very deep and psychological, but it's a view of the world of better be careful and things are not so good. And we're kind of programmed to focus on the negative. That doesn't work in aging because what you focus on accelerates and multiplies. And what you want to do in aging is to make the best of it, to feel better, and to focus on what's positive. So in terms of what you're able to do to make yourself feel better, the first thing is to climb out of the oi, which isn't easy. It kind of grabs you like a frog in boiling water. You have to really kind of practice, like they say at Carnegie, to get to Carnegie Hall. And it's called a practice because it is a practice. It takes lots of practice. And every time an oi, a fetch, a broigus crosses your mind, it's important to be strong enough in terms of your soul strength to pull yourself out of that and to pivot to a positive. Just the other day, I was doing the laundry. And I had the thought out of the blue how grateful I was to do the laundry because I was living independently. And I'm 86 at this age, that's not a light thing. And so I try to use at every moment something that brightens my soul, that lightens my mind. It's easy to be pulled down, especially in these difficult days of the world in terms of, what's happening to Israel, which we love so much, in terms of the political uncertainty, and in terms of our own aging process. We're still more and more spending time doing things like going to the doctor. I just wrote a friend the other day who I hadn't seen for a while. We were going to meet, and she postponed our meeting twice because of doctor's appointments. And I said to her, did you ever think when we met 40 years ago that we'd reach this point where we'd be like everyone else who was our age then that we are now, and we're doing the same thing?
Yes. I mean, we're all familiar with what somebody told me once very recently, that I use this all the time now. When you meet people, that they go to what they call an organ recital.
Exactly.
And instead of saying, what's fun with, what have you done? What have you seen? They say first it's a 20-minute recitation of what doctor I've gone to, what hurts, this, then, the other thing. And I just thought it was a great line. I'm going to, here's the organ recital.
Exactly. And I participated in myself.
Oh, we all do. We all do. We all do.
I mean, part of it's fun and it builds some social connections. But if you focus on what doesn't work instead of what does work, you're really in trouble.
So the juxtaposition in the title of your book, From Oi to Joy, is obviously the word joy. So I wanted to ask you a question because I play around with this a lot, and we do a lot of this teaching in the workshops we do in Jewish Sacred Aging about tensions that we live with, especially as we get a little older. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, because it leaps right out of the title of your book, is this tension between joy and happiness. Because America likes to sell the product of you want to be happy as long as you're happy. So talk to me about how you understand the difference between, because there is a difference between joy and happiness.
Well, I pick joy anytime over happiness because happiness is ephemeral. Happiness is usually tied to external incidents, what does or doesn't happen. Happiness often has to do with pleasure or acquisition, whereas joy is a state of equanimity and well-being within yourself that creates the space for you to focus on what really matters in life, what feeds your soul. I can become joyous just walking down the street and finding a beautiful little flower growing between cracks. How could that flower manage to survive that kind of negative environment? And it's thrilling. And it also has the symbolism of we too can survive difficult circumstances. So joy is an attitude. And it comes from accepting the world the way it is instead of fighting to change it, which is not to be abandoned altogether. But let's be realistic. One of my favorite other, I guess it's a poem, is the Serenity Prayer. And
Oh
that's
yeah,
that
right.
that Dr. Alvin Fine's poem ends the book, but the Serenity Prayer starts the book, because that's the basis of the whole message I'm trying to convey, is that you have to accept life as it is.
So you, in the context of the book, you really do talk a lot, either subliminally or directly, about attitude, and the importance of a positive attitude, which flows from the title. There's a lot of people who they'll tell you, you can give a talk about attitude and then positive, glass half full, blah blah, and they'll say, yeah, that's really good for you, but I'm wired. My attitude is, it's just not there. I can't do that. How do you manage to deal with that? I mean, because not everybody can flip a switch and say, positive attitude. The sun will come out tomorrow. Click your heels. Dorothy going back to Kansas. Talk to me about it, because it's we run into that a lot.
Yes, and I've given that some thought, because it's true. It goes back to the practice. What's the smallest step someone can do to distance themselves from that kind of doomsday worldview? Where they're feeling hopeless and they're feeling powerless. And one of the reasons I call it spiritual aging is you don't have to rely on yourself. I mean, you can really get support from God to take you on a better path. We pray all the time for help in changing, for help in receiving. And I think that begins to open a crack a little bit. And it takes practice. And it takes a willingness to submerge yourself in a community that doesn't think that way, or at least with people who don't think that way, so you can begin to expand your boundaries. I mean, there's a lot of depression and sadness and hopelessness in society as a whole, and especially with older people who are lonely and disappointed in some of their life choices. And they really need help in reframing how they think, and they don't know how to do it. But the book can tell them. I mean, there are lots of lists and chapters and instructions and suggestions and questions to begin to examine fixed ways of thinking that can loosen up a little bit. And once you get a teeniest opening, you can begin to expand it. And maybe they won't get as far as someone who has a more positive personality and can jump right in, but they'll certainly feel a lot better than if they didn't do the work.
Right. There in each section, and for some reason when I read the book, it reminded me like of journaling. And you mentioned journaling. I want to come back to that in a second. But in almost every section, there are these lists of questions. What do you think about this? How do you approach that? And almost as if you were teaching this class, and I'm sure you do. Those are the little pre-test questions for discussion to frame the conversation, to open it up. But you talk about how important in your concept and your conceptualization of this journey that you're on and that you want other people to go on is the idea of journaling. Talk to me about that.
Journaling is very useful, and I do it not as much as I used to, because I'm not sure who's going to read them when I'm done, and do I want to leave them for that purpose? It's not journaling. Journaling is just a technique to become more introspective and self-reflective and try to raise your consciousness. And there are other ways of doing it also. For someone who hasn't done it all, I would suggest they do it. And one of the simplest ways of doing it, if you're not familiar with doing it, is to give yourself permission to write anything, even if it doesn't make sense, just freedom to flow in terms of what comes into your mind and getting it down. And that can begin to loosen up some thought patterns.
Yeah, one of the things also that flows through the book is exactly what you just said, that line that you just used for yourself, the giving oneself permission. It may have been in the section about spiritual aging. I can't quite recall itself, but in essence of saying you have choices. One of them being is to really live your life not as you wish it, not as it's been defined by other people, which I think for some people as we get older, we reach a stage where say, I can do this. I'm giving myself permission to be who I really, really am, which is a gift. How do you bring joy to that growing number of what some scholars call the fourth stage of life, the frail elderly, the people there are hundreds, thousands who are in institutions, in facilities. They're alone, they're frail, they're dependent on other people. How do they bring joy into their life?
I'm glad you asked that question. And in fact, I've given it a lot of thought. There's a little story in the book about a woman who goes into a nursing home. And when she gets there, she's greeted and they say, "We hope you'll like it here." And she said, "I know I'll like it here. I've made up my mind that I'm going to like it here." And that is an example of the attitude of grace, of allowing things to be as they are, not insisting they be as they used to be, as you want them to be, or the kind of service you're getting isn't as quick as you would like. It gets harder and harder. I mean, it's even harder for me to do it now than last year.
Right.
I've had more things to deal with. I've had more health issues. It takes a lot more determination, energy, and conviction. But the alternative is so debilitating.
So let me ask you a question that this comes up all the time. And just the other day I was doing a workshop, and again, somebody who I knew pulled me aside before the formal thing and looked in the eye and said, "I need to ask you, how do I find meaning after a debilitating loss?" Loss, it becomes part of our aging process. We like it. You have the greatest attitude in the world, but there are still losses, natural and unnatural losses that take place. So how do you bring that way to joy in dealing with loss?
Loss is inevitable, and it's not just confined to aging. I mean, you could lose a spouse, you can lose a child, any point in your life. What's worse about having something like that happen when you're aging is you're already losing parts of yourself and parts of your ability and parts of your feeling of well-being. So it makes it harder. There's no easy answers. But again, to focus on, if it's a spouse you lost, to focus on the joys you had together, the good times, the memories that can keep you company, rather than how terrible you feel that they're not there anymore. It's a big plus. In terms of a loss, there are people who have to deal at all ages with losing limbs, losing mobility, and just being grateful for what you have helps, even though it's not what you would want.
You talk in the book a lot, and there's a huge volume of literature now coming out from all perspectives, especially post-pandemic, about the importance of gratitude. And there are prayers in the liturgy. There's prayers in the prayer book. You're at Emmanuel, and you probably use Mishkan Tefillah in the morning service, in the Amidah in the morning. There's this magnificent page of Modim Anachnu Lach, which is a gratitude prayer. How important is it in this stage of our life to have a practice of gratitude?
It's absolutely imperative. And not only psychologically and spiritually, but biologically. There's more and more research as to how thought patterns impact cellular activity. And if we just think, no matter how bad our situation is, how terrible we feel, that if we have a bed to sleep in, a roof over our head, some food in the refrigerator, some change in our pockets, we're better than 95% of the people on the planet.
That's correct. That's correct. And you channel some Becca Levy quotes in the book, too, that really talk about. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, a colleague of ours, I think in the state of Washington, wrote a meditation on I think the meditation was called On Sheltering in Place, if you remember that phrase. And we posted it on the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. Got thousands of hits because it basically said, this is a major inconvenience. And basically said exactly what you were saying. But for most of us, there's food in the refrigerator, you have heat, air conditioning, a bed to sleep in, an ability to contact other people and friends. There's a really interesting, but I want to do this before we run out of time. At the end of the book, you have these series of appendices, which I think is the right way to say this, about the A game, the dreadful D's, and the resilient R's. Okay, what are these?
Those are the essence of the book, and they're also repeated from chapters earlier in the book. But the dreadful D's are basically what feeds the oys. I remember Zalman always saying, some people have pickle juice in their brain, and you really need to sweeten it up a little bit because otherwise you see everything through the lens of pickle juice. There is a psychological term called reticular attention, in which if you have something on your mind, for example, you're buying a new car and you want a red Ford convertible, having never seen them on the road prior, all of a sudden, that's what you're saying. Well, it's the same thing with looking for things that will irritate you. They show up more if your mind is kind of predisposed. And that's what the E's are. It's dread, and it's despair, and it's difficulty, and it's all the difficult things that could preoccupy you. The A game is having to do with what's more positive, accepting, accommodating, being more affectionate, all more positive things. But the thing that gets you through life at any age, whether you're a toddler or an octogenarian, is resilient. It's really the ability to be flexible and to respond rather than to react. Once you are free of an automatic reaction to something someone said or something that happened that you have absolutely no control over, but can give yourself some space and to think of some options and to be more thoughtful about what your next steps will be, that's true freedom. And it's not joy, but it provides you with the space to have other experiences that can bring you joy. And to manufacture joy when there isn't, it's interesting. I once was privileged to have a conversation with Anatol Sharansky. And I did so right after I had read his autobiography, how he did in solitary confinement for 9 years, and they took away everything except maybe his prayer book. And I said, how did you manage? And it was the ultimate mind control. He said, I didn't make it important. I didn't allow it to control me. And now what I'm trying to ask these elderly people, or not so elderly people, but on their path to becoming elderly, is to use some of that kind of thinking and psychological strength and spiritual strength, which is why I call it spiritual aging, because you can't do it if you get locked in your mind and in your ego. My website is spiritualaging.com, and I'd spell out more about what spiritual aging is there. I spell out some of the workshops I do, one of which is called From Worrier to Warrior. And it'll give people a better idea to know how they might benefit from some of these.
So spiritualaging.com, Shulamit.org. I get my comms and my orgs mixed up a lot.
Yeah.
Spiritualaging.org.
Yeah.
Shulamit, again, the book From OY, O-Y, to Joy, subtitled Making the Best of Your Life for the Rest of Your Life. Thank you for joining us today. Stay healthy. We wish you continued success. Say hello to San Francisco for me, and just take care of yourself. And most of all, just stay healthy.
Thank you so much. I wish you both the same. And it was a pleasure doing this with you. And
thank you.
Look forward to future contact if possible.
To all of you, thank you for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, check out the website, jewishsacredaging.com, the Facebook page. Again, email me if you have a suggestion at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the studios of Lubetkin Media Company in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and a huge shout out to our technological genius and guru, Steve Lubetkin. Thank you again for joining us. We really, really do appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you again on the next Seekers of Meaning. And in the meantime, just stay safe, stay healthy, and be kind to one another. Shalom.